Hi there, it's Lori Wright, also known as Not Your Average Grandma, here for another episode of Living Your Spark Second Half. I thought I should probably introduce myself at the beginning of my episodes because some people might be listening for the first time. So if you're a new listener, welcome. Today's guest is a repeat visitor. I'm so excited to have Merle Saferstein back. She first came on the podcast in July, about 18 months ago. And she is such a delight. I love talking to her. She's like many of my guests I could talk to for hours, and I often do extend the conversation after our interview. Merle is an author, and she has really dedicated her life to legacy building. She is an expert in that area. And the reason she came back on the show is because she has a new book. It captures the life lessons of 90 individuals over the age of 90. She is so passionate about and has a commitment to memories, education, and the preservation of personal legacies. She's a public speaker. She's a pioneer in legacy journaling. I hope you're inspired to begin to journal past experiences because that's the legacy you leave. She touched on something that it's not just about experiences, it's about what you value, and incredible conversation. And she's also a bereavement volunteer, and she is turning 80 on the day, December 12th, that her book launches. So I'm thrilled for her. I'm so inspired by how active she is with her purpose. And it just goes to show you that I think the more we provide value in the world, it contributes to our longevity and our happiness. And she is a perfect example of that. So without further ado, let's get to the episode now. Welcome to another episode of Living Your Sparked Second Half. And I have Merle Saferstein here with me, and she is a repeat guest. I've had a few repeat guests lately, and I love catching up and seeing what new and exciting things my guests are doing. And you have a new book. So welcome back, Merle.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
And I love the book. I love the idea of the book. You're going to fill us all in. But I did see, as I said before I hit record, an Instagram post about your book. I first want to refer listeners back to your first episode because we go into a lot of detail on your background, and you can touch on that. But I think it'd be great to reference that episode 345 is the way you are living the legacy you want to leave. And so Merle is all about legacy leaving. Well, legacy building and then leaving, right? And I think a lot of us have legacies, as we talked about before, but we don't think of them as legacies. And how can you really enhance that of your life and leave some memories for the people that are behind you? It's interesting because my mom died in June, and she was the exact opposite of a hoarder. She kept nothing, and there's very little, and my dad's gone. So the memories kind of died with them. I have this box, which is so interesting that it's sitting here, and I had just looked at it. I spread some of their ashes. One of the things she wanted me to do when she died is to mix her ashes with my dad's and to spread them in her garden. She died, and she was living when she died, in a assisted living. So she no longer had a garden. She loved her gardens. So we have some azaleas. We have an azalea bed overlooking the 8th fairway in our backyard. And I thought, what a beautiful place for them to be, and overlooking the fairway where the sun sets every night. So half of them is there, and the other half I selfishly kept in an urn. But this box, I have a laundry basket of mementos, and I have this box which has cards that my dad, these index cards, like at least probably 200 of them, that my dad would leave instead of little sticky notes, because I didn't have sticky notes then. He would leave little index card notes to her. And that is so cherished by me. I love that I have this. But in terms of stories, that the stories almost died with them. The stories that I'm sure were inside of them that they never shared and that
Mm.
we never had those conversations. And my mom, she had deteriorated and really wasn't communicative for several of her last few years. So by the time I realized, oh, I've got to capture this, it was too late. And that was all very spontaneous because as I was sitting here starting this conversation, I looked over and I saw that shoebox. And it's funny, here you are, and we're have this topic to talk about. So let's start with how you got on the how you realized the significance of leaving a legacy and you made it your later in life passion. Again, I'll refer people back to the original episode that you could touch on. We delved more in that in the other episode, but you did have a career which was about a little bit about making legacies, but then you really expanded on that in a beautiful way and now have a couple of courses you've developed about that. So I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. What happened was when I worked at the Holocaust Center as the director of educational outreach, and I worked with about 500 Holocaust survivors. And our goal was really to help pass along their legacy of remembrance. And to Holocaust survivors, regardless of what they did in their lives after the Holocaust, when they talked about legacy, it was always the Holocaust was what they wanted to talk about. That's what they wanted people to know and remember. When I retired, I knew that I wasn't done working, but after 26 years of being at the Holocaust Center, I felt like it was time to do some of the other things I wanted to do, one of which was to write a book. But I also knew I wanted to teach and I knew I wanted to speak. So I started thinking about what it was that I could teach. And one day in my journaling, because I journal almost daily, I wrote down something about legacy. And then I said to myself, I wonder if there's something to that. I wonder if people would be interested in exploring it. And I had really never thought about legacy in that way before. And so I developed a course called Living and Leaving Your Legacy. So I retired in December of 2011. I think that I'm now on my 70th class. So I've taught 6 to 8 week courses. And then I wrote 2 books based on journals and called them Living and Leaving My Legacy. And I've been teaching classes based on 6 chapters of each of the 2 books. So that's how Legacy got started. I do a lot of helping people pass along their legacy by doing some kind of legacy project. Not often, but for a long time, I was working with hospice and would sit at people's bedsides and actually help them do some kind of legacy project. So, for example, there was a woman who was 49 years old who was dying. She had a 19-year-old son, and she really wanted to leave something to her son. And they were waiting for a videographer to come and record her. And her husband, who was sitting with us, was sitting with an iPad. And I said to him, you don't need to wait for anyone. You can do this. And it was really interesting because I left after 2.5 hours, which is a very long time to stay with a hospice patient, but she really needed the guidance and conversation. He started recording her. He said he recorded her for 4 hours. The next morning, she did not wake up. She was in a coma and died that night. And that was for me. So he called me the day after to tell me that for me was the lesson that you are never too young. It is never too soon to be able to share the stories and pass along the wisdom.
Yeah. One of the things I think of with the Holocaust victims is that, and it's interesting that they want to talk about the Holocaust. And I think that sharing that history is so important that everybody is aware of what happened. But yet, I wonder how, especially when you have a significant event in your life, how much people focus on that one thing as their legacy versus their entire life as their legacy. And I think it opening up all the different aspects of someone and their life and the life they've lived, and their personality and their character. It's so much more than one event or one accomplishment.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you say that because after I retired, I was asked to speak to a group of child survivors. So they are people who were 14 and younger during the Holocaust. And I knew many of them. Many of them had been interviewed by the center, by the Holocaust Center where I worked. There were probably about 70, 75 people. And I would say I knew 45 of them, for example. And I knew about their lives to some extent besides the Holocaust. But I asked them to think out of the box. And I said to them, look, what you leave us, your legacy of remembrance is really important. But I mean, they were kids when the Holocaust was over, and they lived this full life. They came to the United States, to Canada, wherever they came, and they built careers, family. They had all of that. And many of them, I'm just exactly what you're saying. Many of them really hadn't thought beyond that, beyond the Holocaust. And I said to them, I'm going to ask you to really stretch and start thinking about that because we know you as a productive citizen who has accomplished so much, who raised a family, and we want you to know that you're going to be remembered for that too, not just for the Holocaust. So it's really interesting that you say that.
Yeah. Yeah. That it just struck me as we were talking about that. Let's talk about your new book. I mean, bring me up to speed because I love the subject that you chose and it aligns with what you do in terms of capturing people's legacy. But I love it because it's focusing on, is it people over 90?
Right. So let me tell you how it all began, because it really was not my idea. So one of the women, her name is Sandra Koifman, was a facilitator at some of the programs that we used to do at the Holocaust Center. And I knew her not well because she would participate, but there were hundreds of people that participated. But Sandra, she kind of followed what I was doing after I retired, and she had me come and speak to a group about writing an ethical will. And at one point, I'm going to say 3 years ago, January, she called me up and she said, I'm thinking of doing this project, but I really can only do it if you do it with me. And I said, what is it? And she said, I want to interview people 100 years and over. And I said, Sandra, 100 people 100 years and over. I said, it's not going to happen. I said, I don't think that we can find 100-year-olds who are, first of all, that alone is hard to find, but then people who are really still have their total senses and are able to really share their lives. So I said, how about 90 people over 90? I think we could do that. And she said, okay. So she said, let me think about it. Let me get this together. And she's talking about we'll go all over the country and interview people. And I loved that idea. So I said, great. And so about 3 months later, she called me up and she said, okay, I'm ready to go. And I said, all right, what do we do? So she asked a friend of hers who is a graphic designer to join the team. That person then brought in a photographer. The photographer's name is Pipe Yanguis, and he is a photobiographer. He goes into people's lives basically and photographs them the way they're living, not weddings and funerals and those kinds of things, but just their lives. And the graphic designer had to leave because her children were getting married and she had a lot going on. And so the graphic designer for my book, for my legacy books, was really interested. And at the time, I was still working on writing those books. So Jenny Menzel is her name. Jenny said, I'd love to work with you. So we're all doing this, this is not to make money. We're doing it because we wanted to do it. So we now had a team of 4 of us. And basically what we did was we went through the community and just spread the word that we were interviewing people. We wanted more than anything to have a diverse population. And that wasn't so easy. Sandra is Hispanic. So Sandra interviewed the Hispanic speaking people. I interviewed most of the English speaking people, but there were times where someone had a short window of time and I was working on my book. So Sandra would go and do that interview. Went to every single interview and he took a photograph of each of the interviewees. And then we sent them a portrait of themselves, which they were very excited about. And so he was really the lucky one. He got to meet all 90 of the people. Sandra, when she did the Hispanic interviews, would transcribe them for me and then send them. And my job was to write up each of the interviews. So I came up with questions, and some of the questions, like, what was the most significant world event in your lifetime? Who influenced you the most? What do you think about love? What do you attribute your longevity to? Tell us about your career. Did you have a career? What did you do? They talked about their families. And so I asked, each interview was about an hour. I'd say I asked about 20 questions. A really interesting story about that. My granddaughter at the time was in high school and she was doing this project where they were going into an assisted living facility and they were interviewing people. So she called me up and she said, Grammy, this is what I'm doing. I need questions. And I said, Bella, I've got the questions. I have them all. So I sent her the questions. And then a few weeks later, she called me up and she said, basically, there were a team of three of them that were interviewing one person. They each had to come up with questions, and they chose the questions they wanted. She said, but before I can go into the facility and interview people, I need to interview someone. So can I interview you? This was like at 9:30 at night, and I almost never answer my phone, but it's my granddaughter, so I did. So I said, all right, let's do that over the weekend. She said, no, I need it tomorrow morning. So I said, okay, of course. And she started asking the questions. And they were the questions that I have been asking these 90-year-old, 90, one woman, 105. I mean, just incredible. And it was shocking to me because really, Lori, I mean, some of the questions were really hard to answer. And I thought to myself, this is amazing. I walked into these strangers' homes, sat down and asked them the questions. Almost no one ever hesitated. Once in a while, someone would say, that's a really hard question. But I was having a difficult time answering them. And so it really gave me a sense of these people and who they were and how strong they were to do this.
Yeah,
So
being the subject, the roles are reversed.
absolutely.
I was going to ask you if they saw the questions in advance. And I understand sometimes the desire for subjects to want the questions in advance, but sometimes the initial response, the response that comes to mind first, is usually the best and most authentic. And I found when in a lot of things, different things I do where I have somebody and I give questions in advance, it's an interview or getting a testimonial about something that I've done, they want to write it all down and they want to be perfect. And there's so much of, I want to be my best. It's so ingrained in us. And it usually comes across as not the answer that would have come naturally,
Mhm.
or they read it, or it's just not delivered in this heartfelt way. And although I'm sure it might take time and people might, oh, I later reflect on something, I should have said this. But I do think the impromptu and not giving questions in advance is the right way to go.
I think so too. One man, his 96-year-old, well, he was actually 97. He was a physician, retired at 96. And we met him at his office to interview him because he was still going into the office to introduce his patients to the new doctors. He wanted the transition to be smooth. Amazing man. He called me after an interview and said, I thought of this and I thought of this and I thought of this, just because he was really thinking about that. But I agree. I mean, I think the spontaneity is really works well. There were a few of the interviewees who were nervous. Like, I've been thinking about this. I didn't sleep last night, which was unfortunate. But then by the time they were through, they were so happy. And I remember when we used to interview Holocaust survivors, they would talk about how they didn't sleep the night before, they didn't sleep the night after. I mean, that was really bringing up a lot of really terrible memories. In the case of this book, there were some very difficult life experiences some of them had, but it was really mostly positive, which turned out to be, just wonderful.
Yeah. Do you prompt them? So I think people get nervous because they think of the largesse of a book and so many strangers reading their story. But do you ever, I would think it would, I think if it were me and I was a subject, it would be really helpful if somebody just said to me, what do you want your grandchildren to know about you? If your grandchildren were gifted this book and they sat down to read it, what do they want to know about Nanny? Or what do you want them to know about Nanny?
So, what we always said, how we always framed it was, we want to know your words of wisdom. So, the name of the book is Wisdom of the Century. What we're really looking for is your wisdom, your life lessons. What can you share with us? What do you want this generation and future generations to know and learn from you? And so that's basically how we framed the whole thing. And it has turned out, it turned out that some of them would just rattle off one life lesson after another. It was amazing to me how sharp they were.
Yeah,
Really.
it's so interesting about the world event or cultural event or whatever you want to call it. You think sometimes with people in the same age group that maybe one significant event would come up repeatedly, but with different cultures, with some maybe even being immigrants who didn't live here when they were at that point in their life.
Right.
And when I think of it, I got a few events pop up in my head that would be significant enough to mention. I think 9/11 is the one that probably comes up most quickly about because I was a mom of one daughter was in her freshman year in college and one daughter was a junior in high school. And I just thought about all the mothers and fathers whose children were never going to see them. And for me, that was just a horrific situation. But then there were other things that impacted my life. Presidents assassinated, Reagan got shot, the pandemic. I mean, yeah. So I can imagine, and depending on how somebody was personally affected in their life, yeah.
So
So did you find that to be true? There were a lot of different scenarios.
we had people from 20 different countries because we're in Miami. So we did Florida, basically mostly Miami, but we did do a few people from the West Coast. What we found was that, like, people from Cuba, their event for them was Castro, the revolution, and how they came here. But there were others from, I think, 4 or 5 Holocaust survivors. We had some people, one man, George Gibson, who was the first Black Miami-Dade police officer.
Oh, wow.
He came here when he was 6, and he told me how he used to sit. His parents had a store, and so they would place him in front of the store with all these other older men who had been, some of them who had been slaves during slavery. And the things that he learned, he was a Haitian, he was from Haiti, so he was Haitian. And he talked about even the prejudice between the African Americans and the Haitian American Blacks, which was really interesting. I had no idea that that actually happened, but he talked about that. This man was so incredible. He talked about how a Black man had poked a white man with an umbrella, and it started this whole big thing where the Ku Klux Klan came down to Miami to march. And he said that he confronted the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and the guy actually backed down and left. They didn't march. And he said after that, he was sent into different communities whenever there was unrest to bring calm. That's just the kind of person he was. He was 99.
Brave. Yeah.
99 when I interviewed him. He knew, he could remember all his teachers from elementary school. He had an amazing recall, and his stories were fabulous. And then 30 years ago, he became a deacon in the Catholic Church. So besides being this police officer, he also was a deacon. The stories, Lori, that I
Mm,
heard, just
yeah. That's so neat. I was recently with my grandkids in Charleston. I went down for a week and they're getting, well, they're older now, less parental involvement. So they come and can spend some time with me out of diapers and such. But there's a 5-year old, one will be 8 this Friday. Then there's a 12-year-old and 14-year-old. And so I actually had some individual time with each of them. And my 12-year-old grandson, and this made me think of it when you're talking about telling stories, we drove to Dick's because I wanted to get him a sweatshirt. And so we're driving to Dick's, and I don't know what made me think of it, but I thought of this funny story that happened. I had this teacher, this amazing history teacher, and he was my seventh and eighth grade history teacher. And I told him this story. And I said to him, I said, I don't think your mom even knows about that story. I said, you'll have to ask your mom and tell her that I told you the story and see if she remembers me telling it. And I thought how special that was, that I had the opportunity to be alone with him, because if I told the story and everybody was around, he probably wouldn't have retained it.
Yeah.
And secondly, it really gave us this special little bond in that moment of time, that he knew something that maybe nobody else in his family knew about.
Right.
And I thought to myself, I need to come up with more stories to share with my grandkids so they could remember me in that way, of these funny little, and maybe they'll remember them and maybe they won't, but it's just that a deeper level of knowing.
Right. Right. And that's what we want to do. We want to pass them along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want
Really.
to know about the story, it was my father was also an assistant principal at that school, and he knew all the teachers. And this one teacher happened to be one of his friends. And we were in this because we had some overcrowding in our school. So we were in this Quonset hut that was next to the school. And it couldn't have been done in any other situation, but there was a door at the end of the classroom that was in the middle, and it just kind of led into this tube of a room. And my dad found a horse on the property of the school. I guess it got away from wherever it had gotten away from. And the door opened, and here's my dad leading this horse in to my eighth grade classroom. So that was quite funny. Very unusual story. Most kids don't have their fathers who are assistant principals, and most kids don't have a horse brought into their classroom. But yeah, I don't know what got us on that topic, but it's a story that a memorable story.
Right. And
Yeah.
those are important. I mean, it's important to share with people. I know.
Yeah.
I I was going to be speaking, doing a 6-week class with grandmothers. And so I was with my granddaughters at the time, and they were maybe, let's see, maybe 8 and 12. And so I said to them, I need questions. What kinds of questions? I was dying for them to ask me questions about my own life, and they rarely do. It's mostly I have to just offer them. They don't ask that much, but I'm trying to get everyone to learn to ask questions. It's really important. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that a motorcycle?
It was a motorcycle. I hope. Something. I don't know
You
what
look
it
like you're in such this like private exotic garden, and then there's like this motorcycle noise.
was.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's in my backyard.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but
but
I really do think that culturally we're there's so much noise, and we're always in these groups and we're always around people, and I don't think a lot of one-on-one time is spent. And the grandparents who are able to do that with their grandchildren, they're so fortunate, and their grandchildren are so fortunate. And I'm sure that grandchildren, and it is true that you have a different relationship with grandkids than you do with your kids. You're not the overseer, the no sayer or naysayer. You're the goodie bringer, the sweatshirt getter. You're the one that, yeah, it's kind of fun. And I bet that children actually learn things about their parents from their kids.
Oh, definitely. So Holocaust survivors used to always say it was much easier to tell their grandchildren the stories than their children, because it was too hard for them to put that pain on their children, even though the it generationally the trauma just got passed down and passed down. But very often I think that there's a very different relationship between grandparents and grandchildren. I think that makes a big difference. One of the things that I found when you're talking about talking and listening, the people that we interviewed were so grateful to be interviewed. It was like
Mm.
someone is listening to my story. Someone wants to know what I have to say. And I just found that so delightful. I walked out feeling so good because they were so happy that
They're
they were
valued. They're
right.
being valued for
Absolutely.
truly who they are
Right.
and the wisdom they have.
Right. And the wisdom. So what we do in the book is we have one page that has two columns. One column generally is their story, just facts from their story as much as I could fit into that column, sometimes a little over to the second column, and then their words of wisdom. And then we have a photo of them. So a full page photograph, which are the photos are beautiful. And they are all on our website, on wisdomofthecentury.com website, so anyone can see them. And then we have one page for each person that has just one of their quotes. So it's like each person has 3 pages in the book. So the book is 300 pages. We're actually getting the first copy today. We're very excited. So one of the things that I want to talk about that I think is just so fabulous is I've worked with a lot of teams in my career, a lot of teams, and I have never worked with a team like this one.
Mm.
Been interesting because, first of all, one of them is 40, one is 41, Sandra's 58. I'm going to be 80 next week. So I'm
Happy
twice.
birthday.
Thank you. I know it's pretty exciting. But for two of them, I'm really twice their age. And each one has his or her own expertise. Nobody, nobody tramps on that. We just totally respect and honor. So if Pipe says something about photography or the art, we defer to him. When it comes to the writing, if there's a question, I get the final say. And Jenny, Jenny's done that. But everything we do, even to words on a page, everyone goes through it and decides, and then we talk about it. I've never worked so intensely with 3 other people to make something happen. But the respect that we have for one another, to me, it's been the most joyous experience. And we've had very little where we've really had to discuss and figure out and whatever. Mostly we've just said, you know what, you get this one. I'll leave this one up to you.
Kind of makes you sad to have the project be over, huh?
We're talking about doing something else. We're not sure that we want to be done because it really has been magical. And I think that I don't consider this my book. I consider it our book. We are a team. And every single person, for example, Jenny in the beginning didn't have that much to do. And now she's top heavy because she's doing social media. She did the formatting. So at the end, it's hers, where Sandra and I were working really hard and Pipe was going to every interview. So it's been this group effort. And when we started talking about where we were going to have the launch for the book, Sandra wanted to do it at a museum. So she had a list of museums. And as we were driving to one of the museums, I said to her, have you thought about the History Miami Museum? And she said, no. And I said, I don't even know if it's still there, but 39 years ago, I had brought the Anne Frank and the World 1929 to 1945 to the main library in downtown Miami. It was on a plaza with the History Museum and the Art Museum. The Art Museum has since moved and is now a beautiful building all by itself. So we said, let's go there. And we walked into this museum, and luckily the person we needed to talk to walked by. And so we were able to talk. And that person took us around the museum, and we saw there was an exhibition room. And we looked at each other and said, maybe we could do an exhibition with the photographs. And they were very excited to have us do the launch at their museum. And so next week when we have our launch, we are going to be having an exhibition there for 2 months, which is all the more exciting because now it's expanded the project to something bigger. And the fact that it's at the History Miami Museum just really fits. I mean, that's couldn't be a more perfect place to have it.
That's amazing. And I guess the people who were interviewed are all guests.
So we've already lost 13.
Oh,
13
wow. Well, it's been a 3-year project, you said?
3 years. 13 have died. There are several from out of town. I'd say five, 5 or 6 from not
Mm,
in South Florida. Some of them are too ill to come.
right.
Fa- Families for sure are coming.
Oh,
We told the caterer 150 people. And as of Saturday, the count was 352. So we're really, and we still have 10 days to go. So it's getting bigger and bigger. And it's so exciting. Just
it
so
is exciting. I just had some ideas on how you can continue to work with them and do other projects. I could see a book on long partnerships. So, like 50 plus years of marriages and
yeah,
highlighting different kinds of marriages.
yeah.
Yeah. And just, or different kinds of partnerships. I mean, maybe it's a business partnership, but a wisdom of partnerships or something like that would be really cool.
We have 2 couples in the book. And originally, Sandra wanted to do a combined interview. And I said, no, I don't think that we should do that.
I
I don't,
agree.
yeah, I said, basically, I had to go back and interview each one individually because that wasn't going to work. I mean, it was
Yeah. It's
just
about the individual,
right. So
their
we
wisdom, not
do
the
have
combined wisdom.
we do
Yeah.
have their separate pictures, and we have one picture where we have them as a couple, and one quote that they both agreed on, but
Oh, I
they
love
have
that.
their own pages too. Yeah,
Yeah. That's
we
so
had a lot
neat.
of controversy back and forth of what to do with that, and I finally won. I said it's
Yeah.
better for them to each have their own.
Yeah. So, as we wrap up, I would just like to know a little bit more for my listeners what exactly, how, if they want to really build or document, because isn't it more about documenting your legacy that you've lived up to this point? It's not about creating a new one. Although I'm sure as you document your legacy, you can get inspired about what's next. How can you help someone
Okay.
that with the courses you have? What is that all about? And so if somebody's interested, oh gosh, this is really this has really inspired me to want to leave something, document more about myself or my family and who comes behind me. How would they go about doing that with you?
Okay, so first of all, I think when we talk about legacy, my definition of legacy is how you live your life becomes your legacy. So even if you do nothing, just by living, we learn by example. So one doesn't have to do anything to leave a legacy.
Yes,
That
it's so that's so good because we always think legacy is so big.
right,
Like we think of Bill Gates as leaving his legacy, Mark Zuckerberg, they built their empire and they're leaving this legacy of their work and their money and all that. And it's so much simpler, isn't it?
right. Most people think financial legacy first, but it's just how have you, who have you been? And I always say to people, however you want to be remembered, the next, like I'll say, how do you want to be remembered? And then my next question is, and are you living that way? Because if you want to be remembered a certain way, you better be living that way, because otherwise it's not going to happen. So that's important. In
That's
terms of
good.
in terms of legacy projects, so in my second book, Living and Leaving My Legacy, Volume 2, at the very end, I have a list of legacy projects that I can certainly share. So anyone who wants to, I'm sure that you'll leave my website and email address, can certainly write me and I would be happy to share it. But I will just give you a few examples of what people could do. So one is, and this is the one that I think is above all else, the most significant, and that's called an ethical will. So an ethical will is basically what I consider to be a spiritual document. It is one's life lessons, values, and beliefs, and hopes and dreams. And the way I teach writing an ethical will, and I also have a 2-page piece on that, which I would be happy to share with anyone that would want it. what I do with that is I have people tell me stories. So, for example, if I'm going into a home and someone is going to wants to write an ethical will, I will ask them to tell me stories. And then I will say, what did you learn from that story? Okay, so that's your life lesson. That's a life lesson that you want to pass along. That story is important enough to you that you want me to know it. What did you learn from it? And then values and beliefs. And I have this one sheet I call Words to Inspire that has, I don't know how many words, probably 75 words of just values and characteristics and things that people can just look at and choose the words that speak to them and then write about that. So it's that. And then hopes and dreams, something wishes that you want. So, for example, I first wrote my ethical will in 2000, and I would say that it's a work in progress. So every once in a while, I go back and I add to it. I hope I will always continue to add to it.
Yeah, because you keep evolving.
It's a living document.
What comes up for me is that this is so something that you can do with an elderly relative, not just for yourself. It's something that I wished I had known about when my mom was still
Exactly. Exactly.
functioning from cerebrally. But very quickly after my dad died, she just started losing things. And there's a book called, I forget what it's called, but it's kind of like a memory book about all about me or something. And it gives you question prompts to ask people. And
Right.
one of the questions was, what did you do as a child? What's the one thing you remember doing with your father as a child? And I remember asking my mother that, and she was like, I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know. So, yeah, we didn't get very far with that book, but I think it would be a great exercise. Sometimes I remember I would visit my mom too. It would be like, what can we do besides watch DVDs together?
Right. Right.
It could be a good exercise to do.
I I gave my parents both books like that to fill out. And my dad loved to write, and his is really extensive. And I have learned so much about my dad that I didn't know. But one of the things about legacy projects, we think we're doing it for someone else. But what I have learned is that the gift we give is really the gift we give ourselves. Because to do this, to be able to capture what really matters, is such a gift you're giving yourself. The other thing is you're never too young. So people say I'm like I had a woman in my class who was 38, and there was a man in the same class who was 92. And he looked at her and he said, what in the hell are you doing here? And she looked at him and she said, this is helping me to live a better life. So I really do believe that we're never too old to do this. And so there are lots of different projects, just an interview, a video interview. You can just record stories on your phone. I mean,
Hmm.
there are all kinds of apps that have the ability to do that. So there are lots of different projects that you can do.
We're never too young, really, right? Because
I
we're
say never
not
too old.
guaranteed.
I meant never too young.
Oh,
Yeah,
never too young. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
sorry. No,
yeah.
I meant never too young. Yeah.
Okay. All right. But yeah, that's so true. But you also, I know that I went to your website and you have, is it a group situation where you join with you at certain times and you can go through exercises with you?
Well, I have legacy classes.
Classes. Okay. Classes. All right. Are those virtual?
Everything's virtual now.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So that would be something good because sometimes it's hard to do things on your own necessarily. It's on your long list of things to do. But if you are with a group of people, there's accountability and you have an appointment, which is sometimes we don't ever make for ourselves.
I would like to teach I haven't taught a basic legacy class in a long time. I think I'm getting ready to do that again. I think there's a need. Um,
Hmm.
there's a desire for people to want to learn more. And it's really it has to be someone who's willing to look at themselves,
Yeah.
and think about what matters in life.
Well, I bet my students from the second half Spark School would be interested. They're sitting idly right now since we finished, and I did several different segments. I call them cohorts, but I haven't really run it for a year, and I've just been doing my retreat. And so, yeah, I know that there would be interest there with them. So if you want to do one, let me know.
Oh, I would love to. I would love to.
Okay. Yeah. And I can post about it and send it out to my email list as well.
Great. Okay.
But I
Well,
would love to participate.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We should do
Yeah.
it. So put that out there in the universe. Everybody's hearing it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad we caught up. And it sounds like the work you did was so wonderful, not only for these 90 people, but for their families and for the people who are going to get to read their stories. It's going to be, and I saw, like I said, a post that was done on Instagram, and the pictures are gorgeous.
Pictures are beautiful. And also on our website, we have a 3-minute trailer that just shows some of the behind the scenes of us interviewing and talking. And
Oh,
yeah, it's delightful. So it's wisdomofthecentury.com, and one can purchase a book there. You can see the photographs, you can read some of the different things all
now
about
you
the
mentioned just getting a copy. When is it going to be available?
the copies are going to be available on December 12th.
Ah, so
So,
great
oh,
Christmas gift.
I know it is a great Christmas gift. And December 12th is the day I turn 80. So it's a
Oh my
great,
gosh, that's amazing. Ah,
very exciting.
perfect. Did you plan that?
No, we actually wanted to have the launch on November 3rd, and the museum they only do events on Thursday nights. And so the next Thursday they had booked. The Thursday after was the Miami Book Fair, which is downtown, takes up downtown, so it couldn't be that week. The next week was Thanksgiving. This coming week is Art Basel, which is an international art festival. So for sure, nothing happens in Miami during Art Basel. So the next week was December 12th, and we were standing there and they told us, and I said to myself, well, I can't think of a better way to celebrate my birthday than that.
Exactly. With over 350, maybe
That
400.
too.
That's awesome. All right, Merle. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you. Thank you.
Yes.